was being lost over generations. And that stone tool is a representation of losing a technology and slowly developing a new one. And it's kind of interesting because you can see our first rudimentary tools 3.3 million years ago in the Olduvai Gorge, choppers and scrapers. And you see this evolution that eventually leads to, Folsom points and Solutrean style. Like this is a Solutrean style point 20, 30,000 years ago. Those hunter-gatherers from, France. And this is a small one. Usually they're like that long.
Because what they were hunting or their prey was much larger.
Yeah, it was large. A lot of megafauna,
Yeah.
During this time, you're battling elements, the actual, geography and the wind and the storms, the climate was changing, and the animals you were hunting were well prepared, whether it was through thick hides, thick fur, huge dense bone and layers of fat you had to punch through. And as you see that kind of evolution of the beauty into stone, eventually it declines. And that slug knife is a good representation of the decline of flint knapping as as copper and then into bronze slowly started to take hold in those tools.
Do you think there's any photos of it online?
Slug knife?
Slug knife?
Yeah.
I'm just curious to see what it looks like.
I can just make that video go live right now. That right there. That's a slug knife.
Okay.
There might be a couple more if you scroll down. Yeah, it's called a plano convex knife.
So that's copper then? Or is that stone?
So that's stone.
Yeah.
But if you look at this one in the upper right-hand corner, so when we were doing our knapping, we were discussing, the flake dynamics. So usually on a flake, you have the dorsal side, which is the top side. And that sometimes has cortex, old flake scars on it. It's just been worked. And then on the ventral side, that's the actual portion of stone that was connected to that spall. And when you rip that flake off, it's super smooth. And to be able to take a flake and turn it on both sides, pressure flake and give it shape, give it symmetry, give it aerodynamic flight, takes time and it takes practice. But on these slug knives, you find that they are essentially worked on one side. And how you have to kind of think about this is, as a napper, we were talking about our edges, raising our edges and our center lines. You have to raise that edge 2 or 3 centimeters up to start removing the stone off the top and then balance it by taking stone off the bottom. Well, they didn't know how to do this. They were losing that ability to nap. It was
just kind of like we are losing the ability to write now,
exactly.
Right? Because everybody types.
Talk to text, they type, they do all these different things. So that knife, yes, it was a very simple cutting tool and it's still cut, but it's not a cutting tool that looks like this with symmetry and it's snapped finally. It's just very simple. It's just kind of like your pocket knife that you could cut some fibers with, probably open up an animal with, and that was it. So where they find these is they find them in burial sites. And it's kind of like if you had a loved one pass and they always carried that one buck knife with them.
Yeah.
Like old school buck knife, didn't lock, nothing. They just know how to handle it properly. You'd probably put it in that, that casket of your grandfather, your great-grandfather. And the idea is kind of that these slug knives were part of maybe a hand-me-down or like an older generation of nappers and people that used them as kind of like their tool. And they'd put them in burial sites. And then you really don't see them in a lot of like open archaeological finds. You can find them, but they're really condensed in burial sites.
To compare to an analogy, comparing it to like archery, it would be like 90% of guys hunt with compound bows, myself included.
Yeah.
But there's still guys out that are doing it traditionally. Mm-hmm. And then there's guys that are even doing it like more on a paleo side where you're building your own bows and from start to stop, from ground to
it's a technology, if you will. So from a stick bow, which is resource from the land, everything, including your fletching, sinew, so on, to a compound bow, there's an advancement of technology, but with that advancement, we lose something from the past, and that slug knife is the representation.
So exactly what we just did on the mountainside episode.
Literally.
Literally.
So
that's pretty badass, man.